Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Dave Rubenstein, and I'd like to again welcome you to today's program, The 3 Essential Elements to Getting Value Stream Management Right. In our January issue, the editors of SD Times declared 2019 as the year of value stream management. Now, the term's been around for years in manufacturing, but software organizations are now beginning to learn the benefits of creating a value stream. These include eliminating waste in your production efforts while making processes more repeatable and reliable. But the value stream management space is still immature, and today's session is designed to help you set up a value stream the right way. Before we get started, I have a couple of quick announcements. Today's session will be followed by a live Q&A. You can ask a question at any time during the session. Just click on the questions tab in your control panel, type in the question, and we'll get to as many as time allows. Secondly, today's session is being recorded and will be available on demand on sdtimes.com, usually within 24 hours. Joining us today are Charles Araujo. He's a well-known industry analyst who's also the founder of the Institute for Digital Transformation, which advises organizations on how to make their journey successful. And also with us is Jeff Keys, Director of Product Management at Value Stream Management Platform Provider Latura. Try saying that 3 times fast. He's worked in tech for more than 30 years as a developer, architect, product manager, and evangelist. So here to kick things off is Jeff Keys. Jeff?
Awesome. Thank you very much for that great introduction. And I'm really excited to have you here today. And before we go anywhere else, I'm actually going to do something that's a little bit unusual. First of all, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, most particularly because this webinar is a little different than what I am accustomed to. And it kind of, for those on the line, this kind of came out of the idea of talking with Charles. And, Charles, why don't you give me some background about this really was your kind of idea. How'd this come about?
Yeah, so there's kind of a long history. And first of all, I'm too very excited. To be honest, probably more excited than I should be about talking about value stream management. But I love talking with you, Jeff, and so I think we're going to have a lot of fun. But I've worn lots of hats in my career. I won't go through all the gory details of it. But one of those hats was I was the president of a group called ITSMF USA, and it was an industry group focused on the IT service management, or ITIL, if you've heard of that, space. And we used to, as being on the board and what have you, we used to put on this annual conference every year and had several thousand attendees. It was this big deal. And there were all these, breakouts like you'd expect at a conference. And then in the evening, I would go and I'd be in a bar, like often happens, right? And there'd be all these kind of luminaries from this part of the industry. And we were talking and just having these incredibly rich conversations. And I remember like chuckling. It's like, all these people that are in this conference and they're going to keynotes, going to these breakouts, they should be right here at this bar listening to this conversation, because this would pay for the price of coming to this conference. And so over my career since, I've tried to harness that idea a few times, where it's really just about this kind of comfortable, casual conversation where you start digging into the depths of what's really going on. So that's kind of where it comes from.
I think it's perfect. I guess no drinks in hand, but we'll do our best with the associated water. Kind of moving this forward just to kind of start the conversation. Really, let me talk about an article that my boss wrote, which I loved. I thought it was really cool. He published in Forbes and has gotten all sorts of feedback about how digital transformation was, obviously important, but now it's urgent. That the sense of urgency has really become in its own, that if you're not understanding that you have to evolve or die, that you're really going to miss it, and you'll go the way of many other companies that are starting to go out. But let me ask you: is digital transformation now urgent, and frankly, how does that apply to value stream management?
Well, so first of all, I'm glad Bob wrote that article. I'm glad it got picked up. I'm glad it got lots of traction. But I'm also sitting here going, only now people are figuring out this is urgent? I mean, This has been urgent for a long time. I mean, at least in tech world years, right? I mean, for the last 3 years, this has become an increasingly urgent issue. And I think that if you talk to enterprise executives, I spend most of my time when I'm not talking with folks like you, out talking to enterprise execs, and they've kind of got this message. But there's also, I think, and to answer your second part of this question, how does this connect to VSM? There's a couple of things that are driving this and how it comes together. The first is I think it's now becoming urgent or more urgent because the pace of change is not only increasing, it's showing no signs of letting up.
Right.
Also, the option of, there's some long stories I won't share right now, but it used to be that people could kind of dig their heels in a little bit and go, yeah, change is okay for those guys, but we've got all these reasons. That's all out the window.
Right.
It is now inevitable. Everyone recognizes it. And so it becomes critical. And I think the other major thing is that people have finally started to see digital transformation in the proper light and context. I think for too long, it was viewed as just a fancy term for just another technology project. I think people are recognizing that true, authentic transformation is really about business model transformation first and foremost, but it's about driving innovation. It's about using that technology or that technology fueled innovation to drive competitive value. And this is what brings it to VSM, is that it becomes the ability to execute on that becomes a challenge if you don't have approaches and tools and things like VSM to help you actually connect those dots.
I couldn't agree with you more. I remember, from a messaging guy, because that's part of my job, is part of the messaging was always, tastes great, less filling, and it costs less. And really what's funny now in the world of digital transformation, the value that's implied to businesses is so much greater than whatever it costs to get there that it's nonsensical to have those conversations about improving. You want to improve efficiency for velocity's sake, not because, hey, we want to spend less money, because we'd have to do this or we weren't going to compete.
Yeah, so I think you're seeing that shift in what digital transformation means. But the downside to that, and this is certainly relevant to digital transformation as a term, but it's just as relevant now, I think, to VSM, that it ends up coming with the price of this hype. Right? That it ends up just being frothy and everyone is talking about it and they start attaching stuff to it that has really very little to do with it. And that becomes a real significant challenge with
it. That's right. So now you have urgency, and with urgency, tons of vendors run in because it's a really exciting thing. And then, you end up with hype. Hey, this is so cool. Go faster. We don't know where we're going, but go faster. So walk us through this. Why urgency I get. Why so much confusion?
Well, confusion, I think, because we have all these terms and we've used them to mean different things all the time. And there's only so many different words you have. And so, I think that's a natural confusion. I think the hype is being driven by, on the one hand, what we talked about, right? You have this top-down pressure from kind of the digital transformation angle of things. Well, you also have this bottom-up pressure that's coming from the things like DevOps and Agile and AI Ops, that organizations are adopting these practices, and they are because they're trying to respond. They're trying to create this velocity. They're trying to start to do this at scale. Mm-hmm. And it's sort of like the old Ricky. When I was growing up, my dad loved old Mercedes, and we had this one that was awesome. It looked beautiful. And once you got about 60 miles an hour, it started just, rattling and shaking. And that's part of the challenge, that within these large enterprises, you start doing this stuff and you start getting to that velocity and scale, you start running into issues. And so I think that's creating the pressure. And of course, that pressure leads to hype, but it also opens the door to some new and better ways of doing things, like VSM.
Right. So I guess that's where it's at. Where do you think industry is? Are we at a breaking point? Are we shaken so much as an industry that things are about to cave in?
Yeah, I think we are. I think what most of this has been attempted, or maybe not attempted, it's not the right word, but the initial efforts around these areas have pretty much all been in green fields. They've been in relatively controlled pilots. They've been in all this efforts, and there's been a lot of success, and I'm a big fan of all of it, right? But when you start dealing with this scaling it across the enterprise, starting to tackle these long-standing legacy environments and bringing them into the fold, and start bringing this in a uniform fashion across the entire enterprise of sometimes thousands of developers, yeah, I think you start hitting this breaking point, which is why it becomes critical. First of all, I think that's the part of the business case of why something like VSM is essential for organizations to get into and to get right. But then it also means that you run the risk of the new shiny object you go down that road and you end up, yeah, exactly.
Right.
You don't end up realizing the value. I mean, I think DevOps is broadly susceptible to this. And so, that's really what we're here to talk about, is that there's these three, in my opinion, essential elements that you have to start with to unlock the strategic value that VSM can provide. And if you dive straight in and you don't address that first, then I think you're kind of setting yourself up.
Gotcha. Okay. So if we want to go faster, we've got to adopt VSM, and there's 3 secrets. And we've been kind of dancing around it. So give us the 3 secrets. Let's get into it. What are they?
I'm probably the master of understatement. Well, you're giving it away. You need to let me say it first.
Oh,
Okay,
sorry.
Well, all right. So, even though value is the V in VSM, right? I think that so many people rush into it and they start approaching it tactically. They start approaching it from this nature of, how do I help this to solve some of these specific technical and tactical problems?
Right.
And so as simple or as obvious as it sounds, if you're going to find success with the VSM, you have to start with value. And
what? That's crazy speak.
I know, it's a shocking idea.
I had a vendor over there just said all I needed to do was automate, and I'm there. Or I had to,
I know. Buy this, plug it in, turn it on, and voila. And it's not about the tools, right? There's nothing wrong with the tool. I mean, you guys sell a tool, right? It's not that the tools are bad, but it's just that if that's your starting point, then you're going to miss the boat of what this is really all about. And there's a problem with this as well, and that is value is a slippery term.
Right.
It's not instinctively something that we all understand, or at least we all understand the same way, right? Value is to a certain extent the eye of the beholder. And so the other part of this is, well, who is that beholder? And in my opinion, that beholder should predominantly be your customer, right? The actual consumer of these technologies, of whatever this software is that you're creating, that the person that actually realizes that value, right? And so sometimes, depending on what the software is or where it sits in the stack, maybe that customer is an internal customer perhaps, but really it's about carrying this all the way through, about how this is driving value for the organization. And I guess I'll tee this up in that I believe that process of kind of solidifying around that, of really clarifying what that value is what I call true northing, or creating this North Star.
I think that's so spot on. It's funny. I was chatting again with Bob, and he was talking about, hey, Jeff, if you were to invest into 3 stocks, which one do you think would have been good if you would have looked back 10 years? And he mentioned Amazon, Microsoft, and Domino's Pizza. And I was like, oh, probably Amazon, because that's it. Then he showed me the chart of like Amazon, or not Amazon, but Google, Domino's, and how much their stock price has just exploded because they figured out what they do. Now, in order to get there, they've had to figure out a whole bunch of stuff. Which is, spot on. It's where that ought to go. So, whoops, see, I'm showing this already. So let me back into this a bit. So if we're gonna start with value, and we're gonna get that as our true north, and understanding what that is, where do we go next, and what is the next bit that we have to do? How does it go from there?
Well, I think let me actually, if you don't mind, step back a little bit, because this idea of true north, I've used it throughout a bunch of my career. I've spent a lot of time helping organizations through organizational change management. And I think one of the first things to maybe even step to talk about briefly here is that VSM should be viewed, in my opinion, as an OCM, meaning as an organizational change management effort. It is about a reorientation of this idea of centering on value. I mean, I think even the adoption of things like Agile and DevOps, while I think they have helped move the ball forward in terms of organizations looking at their development practices and starting to try to get focused on the customer and the ultimate utility of whatever it is they're trying to create, there's still this natural tendency to continually pull this back into, oh, we're writing code, right? Or, what is it that we're creating? And so this idea of having something that you can anchor yourself to, that allows you to maintain the proper focus on the customer and on the value that you're trying to derive, is a critical tool from both an organizational change perspective as you start reorienting your organization around this, but also within the actual practice of delivering a software engagement, right? And so to me, the way I describe it literally is you know, and we're going to use this metaphor a little bit later, right? You've got, let's say you're leading an army and you're marching through this forest and the trees are dense.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really, really difficult to know where the heck. It's easy to get spun around and get lost. True North is literally this idea that there's a place that everyone, no matter where you are, can look up and say, that's where we're going.
Mm-hmm.
That's what our objective is. So if we're ever confused, if we're doing the right thing or not, if we're investing in the right thing, if this is the right area we should be putting our priorities, we can all agree to look up and say, that's our true north. That's the value we are trying to create. And now ask ourselves, does this, whatever it is we're trying to deal with, does it help us get there? And if it doesn't, then either you got your true north wrong, which doesn't happen often, or it's probably not the right thing to do, or it's not the right priority. And so I think this idea of creating that true north and getting, when I used to run these large transformational projects with organizations, I would sometimes spend weeks on getting the entire organization agreed on that true north, on that ultimate vision of the value they were trying to create. Because if we didn't lock in on that, then you couldn't possibly execute, because everyone would be going in different directions.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, you know, when we talk about VSM, it is the part that we almost never talk about in any great depth, but that is the starting point. And if you go back to the history of where VSM started and its manufacturing roots, that's what it was. It was understanding the value creation model, how value was created through the supply chain, ultimately to deliver the value to the customer. And if at any point along that chain, that value chain was broken, then the value we're delivering to your customer was going to not be there. Mm-hmm. Right? And so, you know, as simple as it sounds, this idea of creating that true north at the macro and at a micro level is all important, in my opinion.
Gotcha. That seems to differ from, you know, in some cases I read these reports where it's like, it's all about the number of lines you can get checked in, or your deployment frequency, or what's your mean time to recovery. And those are the epic, that's not really what it is it?
Yeah, they're wrong. No, I mean, look, those things are obviously important. I wrote an entire book about this, right? Mm-hmm. Is that you have to connect the dots. It's not that those things are unimportant; they're critically important, right? Because that's how you actually manage on a day-to-day basis. We're gonna keep talking through this, right? If I try to manage an organization or manage a VSM effort simply with a true north, I'm gonna fail. That's not enough to manage, because I need controls along the way. Mm-hmm. But the opposite is also true. I can have all of those metrics, and it's sort of like having the dashboard on your car, right? It gives you all this great information about how fast you're going, the miles, mm-hmm. the gas consumption, all this stuff. But unless you have a map, you know, that GPS telling you that this is where you're going and you're on the right path, all you're going to do is get somewhere, the wrong place, really, really fast.
Right.
Right. And so you need both of them. And my complaint isn't that people have these or these metrics or that they're important. It's that they're missing the other part of this. They're losing sight of the value they should be seeking to create in the first place. And that's the whole point of this entire process.
Love it. I couldn't agree more. Well, moving on from there then, the first element and the first primary goal of moving down this path is understanding the customer and understanding the value that's delivered to them, and implementing systems and so forth to track our progress. What is the second piece?
Well, you just sort of said it, right? You almost went there instinctively or intuitively, and I think most of us do, right? This idea that, okay, once I understand where I'm going or where I'm trying to go, and by the way, I think we need to be careful, right? I use true north, and it sounds big macro, and it is, but it can also be in much more narrow bands, right? In a much more finite kind of capacity. But the second part is you have to have this visibility. Mm-hmm. You have to be able to see where you're going, what you're trying to, you know, not only what you're trying to accomplish, but if you're on the pathway to doing that. And you know, that again is one of those things where it sounds obvious and yet people miss it. And what they often, going back to your point, is we have metrics and they often are very detailed. And again, I mentioned I wrote this book, and this book is really about how to use metrics to drive organizational change. And the fundamental premise is that I have to build a pipeline of metrics, right? Starting first and foremost with the value I'm trying to create, and then ultimately getting all the way down to the things that I can use to drive change, that I can actually control and change behavior or change outcomes. And what often happens with metrics is that people collect them because they sound good, but they don't have any idea why they're collecting it. What's the purpose? The number of meetings. I have a very simple litmus test. If you bring a set of metrics into a meeting and the response is thank you, then you probably don't need those metrics, right? The only purpose of having a metric is that someone is able to make a decision on it. And with the corollary to that, or really as you bubble that up, what that really means is it's about creating visibility. But I'm going to argue, though, there's a challenge in that visibility, like every other term we're using today, can be easily misconstrued or can be watered down. And so just having visibility, I think there's a lot of, and it's not about tools, but there's a lot of pitches out there about, oh, well, this gives you visibility. Just having visibility isn't enough. There's more to it than that.
Well, explain that visibility. Talk about what that means. I mean, if I'm an executive driving and improving application delivery, what does it mean to have visibility? Can you give me some examples of what that looks like?
Sure. Well, so I think, maybe a useful construct through all of this, right, as we're talking, it applies to the true north, it applies to, everything we're going to talk about, is that we need to be thinking in terms of both macro and micro, or degrees of variance. So if I use the same analogy that we're marching this army through a forest, and we know where we're trying to get to, but it's this massive, vast army. And I've got, and pick maybe it's explorers if you're not, I don't want, if we don't be, it's all war, whatever, right? You got all these moving parts. You got you got this group. I'm just going to use the war analogy because I know it well enough, right? You got the soldiers over here at your infantry, and then you got your cavalry units, and you've got your heavy artillery in the back. You got all these different units, and you're trying to move them through this forest. Well, at any one point, I can have visibility if I'm sitting in the middle of all the infantry people of where they're at, their morale, kind of, do they have all their stuff? I can do that. But that's all I can see, right? And I think a lot of times when we talk about visibility, particularly in the context of VSM, that's what we're getting. We're getting this very narrow-banded visibility. Now, again, it's important. It's critical. We need that, right? We need that level of detail, that fine-grained visibility. But if our ultimate goal is to deliver this value, to move us towards our true north, then that's not enough.
Right.
I need to see this visibility holistically. I need to be able to see all of my moving parts and pieces and how they're all interconnected, how they're all working together, and whether or not that something is going to slow me down, right? In the world of DevOps, we talk about the theory of constraints, right? That if I have any one piece of this puzzle fails or becomes a bottleneck, it's going to bring everything down, at least everything that's dependent on that. And that's sort of how we can think of when we're moving this army through this forest. That's what we need. And so the question is, how do you get it? And so, in my mind, it's you kind of build this big giant tower up that gets you high enough that you can see all of this, And so, bringing it back to software terms, what it really means is we need this idea of end-to-end visibility across this entire pipeline and in the context of the value we're trying to create.
That makes me think of a talk I watched by Barclays where the dev team was basically excited about how agile they were and their success in implementing DevOps as far as they could get. And as they zoomed out on the delivery pipeline, they saw the 18 months that was spent in planning the features and deciding which ones, and then the following 6 months after that were in the release process and governance and making sure they had all the things picked out, and what Barclays was doing about solving that. It is funny that somewhere on the metrics conversation of who cares how many lines of code, except it's a good measurement. We don't measure number of meetings, we don't measure number of mouse clicks. Well, let's measure how fast this stuff is actually getting put in and getting it really through the process. That's really good. I remember one time you were talking about being tied to one technology, and talk to me about that, because I thought that was an interesting conversation.
Well, yeah, I think that along these same lines is that when we talk about visibility and I get it, right? You're in the business of selling software. There's a whole bunch of companies out there in the business of selling software. I get it. There's nothing wrong or evil about that. It's and tools like yours, provide a tremendous amount of value, right? There's nothing wrong with the tool. But we all have our limits. We all have, we can only do what we can do from whatever our tool is, right? And so the challenge is that the natural state is to talk about visibility, something like visibility in the context of, well, what is my bounding scope, right? What is that I can actually deliver visibility on?
Mm-hmm.
And so that tends to be limited by some technology-driven domain, right? This is what the visibility is. And so again, there's nothing wrong with that, and it allows you to get that deep visibility that we need at the next layer down. But where I think, again, people miss it is this idea of not having visibility that is limited or tied to a given technology or even a specific part of the process or the pipeline,
Mm-hmm.
but instead getting this agnostic end-to-end visibility that sees the whole thing. And what's interesting about it, I think, is that what you find is that organizations that do this and do this well, it is transformative by itself. You don't, all this talk about driving digital transformation or transforming the culture of organizations, you don't have to do a whole lot of work if you're getting this kind of visibility. If you get these two first steps right, centered, lockstep in on the value you're trying to create, and then creating this visibility where everyone can see all the moving parts and how they're connected and how they're leading or not leading to achieving that value, it has a transformative impact all by itself.
Yep.
And so I think that's this really important part of how, just getting your head around what this means. But there is one other piece though that I want to make sure we get to about DevOps, but I don't want to. We'll go there whenever you're ready.
Go. Now's a good time.
Well, what I think is it's there's something I've observed recently that when people are talking about VSM, they're almost always talking about it in the context of DevOps, almost as this evolutionary maturity of DevOps, right? It's like, and for the reasons we talked about, right? That as you start going down this road, you starting to have challenges with the VSM, and there's nothing inherently within the DevOps principles that says it doesn't work, it doesn't scale, but pragmatically, you need more tools to do that, right? And so that's where I think VSM is extremely valuable, extremely useful. But I think what's really, really important about this is that if I think about, if I, again, go back to my true north, and I say, that's the value we're trying to create for our customers. Mm-hmm. And then I start looking at this end-to-end visibility, what I will often find is that there's elements or components that are essential and critical to delivering that value for my customer or that value, the business value I'm trying to generate, that actually are coming out of systems that may be legacy, that maybe not are, that I'm not applying DevOps to yet, or are not being deployed in an agile type method, whatever. And you can't ignore those. They're part of the value chain. Mm-hmm. And in fact, they're often a very critical part of the value chain. And so VSM is really this sort of agnostic, holistic view of how you bring all of that together. It's not just about DevOps. It's not just this evolution of DevOps. And I'm harping on that a little bit because I think it's absolutely critical that people get grounded first, appropriately before they kind of start diving into all the weeds about it.
Gotcha. Well,
does that make sense to you though? I'm just curious.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's all, just like my Barclays example, there's all this stuff that happened outside of just automating the pipeline and trying to, feed that in. Governance, compliance, you've got also on the front end, all the planning and how do you coordinate organizationally as well as in the product pipeline, how you make these self-directed product teams. And once you have that, how do you not make them be silos and apply governance across them? And when I imagine trying to accomplish some great initiative across a bunch of little microservices, even more my head starts to spin. Okay, how are people going to do this without really managing this thing as a system? And how do you apply improvements to the process, especially as you end up with a lot of little self-directed teams? This is going to be a kind of a mess.
Well, and I imagine you guys, especially given some of your pedigree of where you as an organization have come from, I imagine you see a lot of this, right? I think that's I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think that's even part of how you as an organization ended up here, is that you were kind of naturally saw this evolution and this gap. So, what are your customers? How are they seeing this? Are they seeing these same challenges?
Well, in strides. Most of our customers, in fact, understand the value of the journey of digital transformation or in the process. But since our customers are primarily the large Fortune 1000, their application delivery is different than the usual, simply because they're decades of M&A. You think about banks. Banks have been around for 100 years. Can you imagine working on a system that was 10 years old? How about 20? People not only have retired, but in some cases, they're no longer on the planet. So you're trying to figure out how do we figure out this system? Sure, throw concepts of service virtualization and different levels of abstraction. They're just trying to figure out how are they going to move all this stuff forward and compartmentalize different systems. And so being able to manage that all that's what we were started in and how to improve that process.
I don't want to derail the conversation, but it's an interesting, so I've been spending a lot more of my time recently talking about and writing about modernization and kind of the new modernization. In fact, I had an article in CIO magazine that I published yesterday that talked about this very issue. And that is what it used to be not too long ago. The only reason we were having modernization discussions was because things were going out of support, or they were becoming too costly to maintain or whatever. And so we had to build, modernize them just to kind of keep them running. But what's interesting now is, to your point, is it's this really kind of staggering turn of events, because the customer experience is now driving value, because, whether I'm in banking or it doesn't matter what the business is that the customer now expects this integrated wholeness of the experience, that now suddenly these deep back-end legacy systems are absolutely critical, right, in many cases, to the experience and to the value creation model now. Mm-hmm. And so what things that we were basically looking at, how can we let them die a painless death kind of
right,
let them ride gracefully in the sunset, and now we're going, oh heck,
no, right, we need these.
Yeah.
Pump the brakes, dude. Yeah.
And so when we talk about this end-to-end holistic visibility, I think it's really, really critical that's what we're talking about. It's that you have to understand all of these pieces, whether they're on DevOps or not, whether, it's about making sure you can see everything that is part of the value creation model that you are true northing here.
Very cool. Well, so all this coming together, I can see why there's a bunch of hype. I can see why some people are kind of missing the boat, why maybe they're jumping to the wrong metrics. I can see where there's some fundamental items here, and I've got to find my true north. I then got to go down that process. What really is the next step then? What's the next big topic?
Well, so I think we end up where most people start, and it's I don't want to minimize it, right? This idea that where we end up is, yes, we have to make this real. It does become a tactical effort, but you have to still be intelligent and smart about it. And so to me, I think that this really starts talking about how do you deal with the automation, or maybe even more than just the raw automation, this idea of, like you have here on the slide, right? Taking an integrated approach to the orchestration management and automation. Because here's, I think, the issue is that all this is great in theory. Mm-hmm. And when you start actually trying to put it in practice, it becomes bigger than a breadbox, right? It becomes a significant challenge to execute and sustain this. And we've seen this, historically in the realms of IT, generation after generation, where it's like these great ideas, and then when you try to actually go put them into practice, they start falling apart. Mm-hmm. And so it's about how do you then tactically instrument your value chain so that you can not only actually execute, not only get that visibility, not only protect and deliver and sustain that value, but you can actually scale it. You can do it at velocity, and you can do it without killing yourself, right? Without absolutely pulling my hair. I used to, do these things manually. That's why I lost all my hair.
Hypothetically.
Yeah, because it is. Yeah, exactly. Because it's crazy, and it is really, really difficult to do. But again, I think where to beat this horse until it's completely dead. I don't know where that phrase came from, actually, but it's also about that, taking this agnostic approach to it, right? That you need the ability to orchestrate, manage, and automate across that entire value stream, regardless of where it is or what it touches or how it's connected. It's across all of it. Now, you may not be able to automate all of it, right? Particularly as we were talking about, you have these legacy systems. You may not be able to apply these same types of principles, but it's about taking this holistic view of applying this tactical layer to it.
Right.
So if I'm not automating it, I'm at least orchestrating and managing it.
Correct.
So that it's not just, oh, and that thing over there that nobody has any visibility to, and we don't understand how it's connected to the part. So I think that becomes this third missing element. And again, I would argue it's an abstracted layer above the way most people right now talk about the instrumentation of VSM or the automation around it, because they tend to talk about it in too narrow of bands.
Absolutely. 100% automation. Talk about that. Is that really the goal for all organizations? Is that everything is automated 100% and then you're good? Thank you. So without hesitation, answer's gone.
Well, I think so. Well, you used the word goal, right? Should it be the aspiration? Maybe it. I don't think it's. Here's the question, right? We have our true north. We have the value you're trying to generate. Mm-hmm. The question I have to ask myself is what is the most efficient and effective way of delivering that value sustainably at scale and at velocity? Now, in many, many cases, that's going to be automation, right? Particularly with modern systems that, use RESTful APIs and they're built into my CI/CD pipeline and all of those kinds of things. I want to automate as much as I can because that's going to make it easier for me to protect and sustain that value. But there are going to be systems that just are not going to naturally lend themselves to that. Should I aspire? Well, I think I hate to shut the door, right? I mean,
right.
The technology continues to change so much, but would I make it an absolute? Here's what I won't do. I'm not going to automatically say if I can't automate it, then it's not part of the value chain. That's just not true. It's whether it's part of the value chain because the customer has somehow decided it's part of the value chain, not because I decided or not, right?
Sure.
And so the customer is what determines that. So if it's part of the value chain, then the question is, well, how do I manage that? If I can automate it, great, but I'm not going to stick a stake in the ground and say if I can't automate it, then I won't. And then the other thing I think I'm going to look at is well, what is the cost benefit? Can I deliver that value on a sustainable, at scale, at velocity kind of model, doing it this way? What is the cost that it's going to take or the effort that's involved to build automation to it? And does that outweigh, right? I mean, it's about using value again as a true north, right? The very thing we've talked about, right? Look at the value as your true north and then come back to it and say, now let that guide this decision. So I mean, I would argue that aspirationally,
sure,
looking towards 100% automation should definitely be kind of the perspective you bring to it, but you need to be measured and managed in how you approach it.
Sure, it would make a lot of sense to re-architect, throw away existing internal applications in favor of new features.
Right.
You have to balance that investment.
Yeah, and I'm at least in the short term, I think this idea of 100% automation is probably a pipe dream, and even if you could do it, just not worth the cost and effort. It's not going to help you deliver that value. It's just going to be cool. Yeah, you can go to a conference and talk about how you 100% automated everything and great, but in the balance, I think you'd find that it actually hasn't delivered the value to your customer that you were really striving for.
Yeah, well, in fact, we just had a recent win of a large bank who's really, really well automated. Oh my gosh, well automated. Phenomenal in their DevOps practices. And the major struggle they had, or still having, we just won the business, was in, frankly, seeing the forest from the individual pipelines.
Everything we've talked about. Yeah.
Everything we talked about is because, hey, they're moving really fast, but one team has no idea what the other one's doing. When is this initiative going to get delivered? Nobody knows. I got this feature in. And I want to be careful here because the visibility is the first part, but you have to have the ability. So here's how I describe it. Go back to you got this army marching through the forest. You've got this big tower you've built, so you can now see everything. But then you see something going wrong over there. Right.
Well, you have to then run down the tower, run over to that group, give them redirection, run back up to that tower, and you look and shoot.
Right.
The situation has changed, right? So what you actually need is you need the levers and dials in that tower so you can communicate with the teams, you can adjust them, position them their way, move this, speed these guys up, slow them down, do whatever you've got to do, because that function is focused on creating ultimate value. This automation, this orchestration, this management that we're talking about, there's levers and dials, right? That's what that is. And the other issue, I mean, and you just talked about this customer, I don't know who they are, right? But the automation, the other challenge, I think, no different with the visibility, is that automation has often happened in these little narrow bands.
Mm-hmm.
Great, that's awesome, it's valuable, it's important, but you now also need to be able to orchestrate, manage that across this holistic layer. And so whether that is, a tool of tools, whether that, whatever the approach you take, it's about making sure that you're automating not in only in narrow bands, but also, or automating, orchestrating, managing right across that entire view. So I think that's the critical part.
Absolutely. Well, and here's why Latura is here. I love this conversation because simply, well, that's what we do. People are like, what does Latura do again?
It's shocking. What a coincidence.
What a coincidence. If you're not familiar with value stream management, I hope this gives you the business case behind why it's interesting. It's not just about automating. It's not just about improving your DevOps and Agile practices and incorporating that governance somehow. Really, the point is to get that visibility. Let me just walk you through a few things, because the process of implementing a platform like Latura, and there's other platforms out there that do value stream management, and if you're not looking at value stream management, I highly recommend it. Wherever you are in your DevOps or Agile maturity, you ought to be going down this direction so that you can accomplish these three goals of gaining visibility. The first and most important part is to integrate into the tool chain you've got, to homogenize the heterogeneous nature of the different tools that are out there, to have your ideation folks speak the same language as the creation folks and the release and the operations, so that when there's value to be delivered, that you're all singing from the same sheet of music, as well as in the creation, so that each team can see where do the other things that are being built come across them. The way Latura solves that is we have a very rich integration methodologies to pretty much out of the box to most of the standard tools out there, and lots of abilities to those that aren't. But then we normalize that into a common data model, so we standardize what are use cases and what are user stories, what are epics, what does test data look like, and test management and user environments. But as you pointed out before, Charles, it's not just about normalizing having visibility. You've got to be able to puppeteer what's happening in that world. And we provide...
Can I just jump in really quick?
Yeah.
Because I think, on the one hand, that we wanted to have this conversation because as you and I were talking, prepping for this, one of the things we both agreed is that there's all this focus on kind of the mechanics of VSM and not nearly enough focus on this kind of view of understanding it at really a philosophical level. And I'm a huge believer that if you aren't grounded philosophically, you're not going to be able to execute effectively.
Exactly.
That said, none of that is to undermine how flippin' hard this is to do tactically and in the weeds, right? The actual mechanics of making this work is really hard. And, I know that I think you maybe have a report you're going to share about, some of the practices that people are employing to do that. But that's where, we're a fan of your tool because, in tools like this, right? Because it helps mitigate that. It helps solve some of those problems of taking this extremely knotty, hairy challenge of actually making this pragmatic and real and or making it real, so.
That's it. No, that's exactly it. And making it real regardless of wherever you are. You don't have to be 100% automated. You don't have to make the call, well, gosh, I can't manage across the portfolio because this one's DevOps, and this one's, I've got hot fixes running, urgent fixes with long run releases and the rest of them. It doesn't matter. The whole point is you need to homogenize that. You need to be able to look at it, manage it all from the same, point of view. I think that's where this kind of approach is interesting, is to layer on top of what's happening a management platform. And the first step of that is to bring the data in. The second step is that orchestration and management, so that you can lay out, well, here's my release trains, here's the governance I want to apply to them, here's my environments, and here's how I build those things up, here's my deployment processes. Whether or not they're automated or not, I can still standardize that, and I can take chunks out of it. And that happens to be what our platform does. And there's other tools that would do sections of this. You can stitch them together. Obviously I'm a little tainted because I'm a vendor, but boy, I would bring your tools together this way, because once you do that, now you have complete visibility and management. Now, the cool thing that Latura provides that would be the next step, after you get all the tools integrated and are getting the metrics out of them that you're looking for, getting the visibility, is really being able to get the metrics and some of the predictive analytics out of it, to use modern technology to give you insights about where problems are. As you talked about watching the Army from the watchtower, why not use computers to do what computers are good at, crunching numbers and being like, hey, I can see where this is going. We know in past history that team over there, they're going to be experiencing some problems. You should really pay an extra attention to that. We know what they're going to run into. You can start to compare them over time. It's fascinating to me, with the millions and likely billions spent with tooling in the space of improving application delivery, the most fundamental question still can't be answered well. Are we getting better?
Right.
Who the
Well,
heck?
and just like we talked about, I think, and I you can tell me if this is true, but I'm willing to bet that just as your clients are starting to use your tool and they're getting that visibility, kind of what we talked about, it has its own transformative effect, just because they start realizing, oh my gosh, well, we aren't getting better, or we're getting better here but not there, and it ends up bringing, when you get that visibility, it just starts really changing the game.
It does. Once you bring the team together, what we find is part of the process of implementing value stream management is you want to run and do a value stream mapping exercise as part of that to map out your process. The whole point of that is you have to identify your true north. What's the value we're delivering? Here's the process to do it. And what becomes enormously apparent are the inefficiencies in that process. And when you can draw metrics to it, I mean, who cares if you decreased your deployment time from 2 days to 2 hours if it still takes you 3 weeks to get through approval? Back to your theory of constraints. Hey, you haven't really improved. You have, but you haven't. It's more repeatable. Hopefully, you'll have less errors, and all that will come out. But in terms of getting the real value there,
you're not heading towards your true north.
Exactly. Which is why I like the Domino's example. They know their true north. They deliver pizzas, and they've used technology to do it. That's your business as a company, and that's what we talk to every single day. Even in legacy, where we have a fair number of customers that aren't really understanding the automation world. They're still dealing with things like, hey, I got 4 major releases a year, and I'll have a few minor ones as well, and I'm being asked to go monthly. What the crap do I do? Those are real world scenarios where we've taken those folks and said, great, wherever you're at, reduce the inefficiencies. Find the waste and incorporate that as you work out your process. Don't reduce your, another argument I hear is, well, what about compliance? I have to do all this stuff for compliance. Get them into the value stream mapping exercise. Incorporate those requirements in, and again, a platform like Latura, you get all your audit.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about that. The value of the exercise of value stream mapping and what that can drive as well. Just again from that exposing things, but very cool.
Yeah, well, that's kind of the whole point. So I'll take us to the last slide and see what kind of questions we have.
Well, that was a great presentation, fellas. Certainly enlightening. We have a couple of questions from our attendees, and I'll get this kicked off also. One of the questions was, you were talking about constraints in the value stream, and somebody was asking if you can provide tips for managing those constraints.
Is that to you, Jeff?
Well, I can certainly take that one.
All right.
Well, probably both of us. How do you manage the constraints? First problem, what are your constraints? I mean, it sort of seems, I'm not trying to be obnoxious here, but knowing where those constraints are, that's the point of managing the whole system. Managing application delivery as a system versus let me look at individual tools. And the only way to do that really is to map out and look at where your constraints are. The easiest, simplest way to do that without even any tooling, do a value stream mapping exercise. It's so enlightening. There's lots written about it, lots of webinars. Gosh, that was one
Yeah,
that
I mean,
was done before.
I'll
Go ahead.
pile on that a little bit because it is, the old axiom that, the truth will set you free. There's three things that generally cause constraints, right? The first and the most insidious is ignorance. I don't know I'm a constraint. I don't realize that I'm the one holding everything up, or my team is, or my process is, or whatever. And so the value, just going through this process, the exercise, the ability to see things holistically, because that is, I would say, is in most cases the most common, and that will almost clear it up by itself. Because most people don't go out trying to be a constraint. They aren't trying to be a jerk. They're not trying, right? They just don't know.
Right.
I mean, I literally used to do this in my OCM days where I'd bring people together and just sit them down and walk, it was like a big giant corporate therapy session. And it was because once they kind of understood the effect they were having on others, then things started to change, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, there can also be, external constraints. I may, so I might have, compliance or regulatory issues, or I may have, financial, there may be other, and those are harder to overcome. But again, the biggest thing is exposing them, understanding what they are so that you can start deconstructing the constraint and figuring out, can you get around this or not? And the last one is, in fact, a process or a technological constraint where I simply have a limit on the capacity of the element of the process, or maybe it's the technology itself that's doing it. But again, I think in most cases, the reason you have constraints is less about any one of those specific things and more about the invisibility of the constraint. So by exposing it first and foremost, you can then start effectively managing it.
Excellent. Okay, the next question comes in, and it is, what kinds of metrics should we be focusing on to ensure we are targeting our true north?
You want to start with that, Charles, and then or do you want me to start? I can, either way.
I'll go for it. I mean, so I'm going to give the consultant answer. It depends. The hard part is this, right? The true north is driven by the outcomes and the value you seek to generate. And so there is no single metric. And this is what upsets people, I think, is they want me to give them an answer. And there is no answer. The answer is I have to start by understanding, what does that value creation model look like? And therefore, what can I monitor? And here's the hard part. A lot of times value is esoteric. So in my book, I talk about this idea of a proxy metric. Okay, I may not, in fact, be able to measure the explicit value creation process itself, especially in the days where things like experiential elements of it, or there's these soft, intangible value drivers. I may not be able to specifically or tactically measure that, so I may have to evaluate, how can I establish a proxy metric, something that seems to indicate that I've achieved that value, and then instrument that. So
I think that's spot on. I'm also a fan of some of the flow metrics of how features flow through. I'm a fan of the DevOps-oriented metrics of looking how quickly things recover, and how are we breaking up. Certainly, though, to be effective, you've got to look at your cycle time and lead times for what things take from beginning all the way to end of getting into customers' hands. But you can't do that in the absence of quality and quality metrics. Maybe even other customers of ours are measuring things like Net Promoter Score and incorporating that into the mix.
Well, and so you actually said something that's really important that I probably should have said, is that no single metric will stand on its own, right? And so, I talk in terms of correlation models, but whatever you want to call it, this idea of, if I'm trying to establish that true north and I want to instrument some metrics around it, I then have to continue that line all the way through where I'm able to see the impact of quality, the impact of lines of code, all the way down to that level, and how they are interrelated and connected. I can't have just one metric. Any metric, even a quote unquote good metric, used in isolation is almost always going to deliver an unexpected outcome. And so you have to have all of these together and integrated and related some way.
Yeah. The other thing that we've seen is, as soon as you put one metric up as the golden metric, invariably somebody's going to game it. Hey, it's all about how many check-ins can you do a day? Well, great, man. I changed one letter. Let me check in. Whatever you do, you've got to be able to do more than just that. And
Yeah, well, and I think, not to harp on the metrics piece, but that, it is about the objective outcome, and then it's this idea of, what are my indicative metrics, right? The things that are leading indicators, because almost invariably the actual outcome metric that I'm ultimately trying to achieve is in fact a lagging indicator. So I need leading indicators in that, and then I need what I call the diagnostics or the behavioral metrics, the things that allow you to actually tune the behavior and tune the actual activities that get you to the outcome you're seeking. So yeah, it's about pulling it all together.
Like it.
That's
that
great.
helps.
All right, we have time for another question. We're kind of jumping around a little bit here, but the next question is, how do I get leadership to invest in and focus on managing application delivery as a value stream?
That's all you, Charles.
The good news is I think the further up the food chain you go, the easier this becomes because you start talking their language, right? They don't actually understand the application development process in many cases, or at least not well. So I think that the further up that you go, the easier that becomes. But the key is talking in terms of customer value, right? When you start talking about the customer value, the customer experience, the ability to that this will help drive competitive differentiation in the marketplace, faster speed to market, all the, those are business terms. And I think, maybe that's the way I boil this down. You have to be speaking in the language of business, in the value that it creates, not only for the customers, but for the organization as a whole. And then be explaining how VSM and the application, and really everything we talked about today, I think is the armor, or what you need to help go and position this, because this is, the conversation we just had today is going to make a ton of sense to a business executive. And in fact, in many cases, that's the missing link for them, is that they don't understand all of this tech stuff, and, putting this into a context that helps them understand that connective tissue between the business challenges that they're trying to resolve and how this approach and these technologies and these tools can help them achieve it. It starts to connect the dots.
Yeah, my other commentary to that, I know we're running out of time, is Intellis is always available. Have them talk to Charles. There's a value stream management wave on our website from Forrester. We can get you connected with folks there to help pitch that. It right now is a hot topic at an executive level for a reason. So by all means, use the resources you got. You got a lot.
Great. All right. So I'd like to thank all our attendees for being with us today. And of course, thank you, Charles Araujo, Jeff Keys, for a great presentation on value stream management. Of course, thank you to Latura for sponsoring today's event. And until next time, I'm Dave Rubenstein, Editor-in-Chief of SD Times. So long for now.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.